Welcome back. In this video, we shall talk about Context API in React. Context API is used to pass down data to a tree of components without having to pass it as props. We talked about props earlier on, and we saw how we can pass data from a parent component to a child component using props. Well, there may be cases of complex component trees and we may not need to use props. So we are going to use Context API in such cases. So let's get straight to writing our code and explaining this for everyone to understand. First, let's create 3 more files to add to our my app.jsx. So let's come here and let's say new a.jsx. Let's create a new b.jsx, new b.jsx, and let's create new c.jsx. We have 3 new files added to our project: new a.jsx, new b.jsx, and new c.jsx, all in the src folder. Let's go to our parent component, which is the my app.jsx, and let's have this. Let's call that my app. In our render method, let's return the new a.jsx component, like so, and let's import new a from new a. Now let's go to our new a file and let's also say new a there, get rid of this, and let's return new b component here, like so, and let's import new b from new b. Let's go to our new b component. Let's do that. Let's get rid of this. And let's return these in our render method. Let's return new c, the new c component. Now let's import new c from new c. Let's save that. Now let's head over to our new c component, where we shall return a JSX element to see if our code is working fine. Let's get rid of this, and in here let's pass in a div, and let's just pass this in. Let's say testing. Now let's head over to our browser to see if we have this showing up on our browser. Perfect. So it means all our components are linked properly. Now we are going to use this tree of components to explain the Context API. Now, to use Context API in React, we have to create the context, provide a context value, and consume it. So to create a context, let's create a file. Let's come in here in our src folder. Let's create a file called context.jsx. In that file, we are going to have our import statement ready, and let me come down to the next line. Let's create a variable with the name our context, and let's set that to react.createContext. So let's pass in the brackets there because it's a function and we want to instantiate that. So let's create the provider with this variable, and let's say our context.provider. Let's create the consumer. I said earlier that you provide the context value and consume it. So that's why we are creating the provider and the consumer. So let's say our context.consumer, and that's it there. So the final thing to do here is we'll have to export the provider and the consumer so that any component that needs the data we are going to provide will just consume it. So let's export provider and consumer like so. Now let's save that. Now the next step is using this provider in our parent app component like so after we have imported it. So we'll come here to our parent app component and we are going to import the provider like so. Import provider from context. It's always good to provide in the parent components because all other children components are linked to it. So whatever you provide in the parent components will be accessible by any of the child components. After importing the provider, let's come here in our return statement, let's say provider. Now let's wrap the new A component in the provider there. Now this provider component here will be responsible for providing a value for all the children components in our app tree rather than using props. Now let's say there is a value to pass, a value of my name. We are going to pass it in here. We are going to say value is equal to Joseph Brendan. What this means is my name Joseph Brendan will be available for any component nested in my app component. Now we have provided a value, or let's say a prop, for the whole component tree to make use of. Now any component that wants to make use of the value here will have to consume it. Now let's consume this value. Let's go to the new c.jsx, which is the last component in our tree. And the way to consume this is we are going to import the consumer component. Import consumer, capital letter C there, from context. And now in our return statement, we are going to get rid of this div tag here, and we are going to pass in the consumer component there. And in our consumer tags, we are going to write JavaScript here. So to write JavaScript in JSX, you start that with the curly brackets. So we are going to say, we are going to set a variable. This is an arrow function with an argument set to username. The username argument here will grab the value of our provider context. So let's say, like so, let's return a div now, and in the div tag, let's say my name is, we are going to pass in username now, username. So let's go back to our browser, or let's go back to our server first to see if everything is running well. So in our server we have compiled with warnings. That's in our context.jsx file. Let's go to our context.jsx file and let's see if there's any issue. For now, I can't detect any issue. So let's go to our browser to see what we have. As you can see in our browser, we have the my name is Joseph Brendan. So you can see in our new C component here, we were able to grab this value here, Joseph Brendan, from our parent component, which is the my app component. So let's get rid of this little warning here in our context. I think it's because we had to import component and never made use of it. Let's save that. Let's get rid of the comma sign there. Let's save that and let's go back to our server to see what we have. Compiled successfully. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share.